the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
So we're here tonight to challenge the nature of how business operates at City Hall. You know, we're not here just to change leadership at City Hall. We're here to change how business is fundamentally done at City Hall. We're here to make sure that diversity of thought are embraced, not diminished.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. While most of our attention may be focused on Washington and the change of administrations, the struggle to set the future agenda for the region has been fully joined. On Tuesday evening, Rob Richardson Jr. announced his candidacy for mayor of Cincinnati, joining incumbent John Cranley and councilmember Yvette Simpson. And the field may expand beyond that. I'm inviting each candidate to join me for a one-on-one newsmaker interview early in the year. Closer to May in the primary, we will invite everyone back to talk with each other. Given Rob Richardson's announcement this week, we're starting with him. Robert Richardson Jr. is an attorney. He graduated from the University of Cincinnati with an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering and his JD from the College of Law. In 2008, at the age of 29, Governor Ted Strickland appointed Mr. Richardson to the Board of Trustees of the University of Cincinnati. This past year, he served as the board chair, overseeing the search for a new president for the university, resulting in the naming of Neville Pinto as the incoming president. On December 31st, Mr. Richardson completed his term on the UC board, and on January the 3rd announced his candidacy for mayor. Rob, welcome to Newsmakers.
Dan, great to be here.
And things are moving pretty quick here for you.
Well,
you didn't let a lot of grass grow between December 31st and January 3rd.
No, I actually subscribe to Mark Zuckerberg's definition of innovation: move fast and break things. So we just got to keep moving.
Okay, so you've broken UC. No, I won't go there. Well, you haven't broken UC. One of the
just broken things that need to be broke so we can be better.
All right. You're Rob Richardson Jr., and people may not know you, but they may have a sense they know the name because of your father.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit about how all of that fits together, because your father has taken on some very public roles too.
Oh, he absolutely has, and I'll tell a little bit about really my family's kind of inspiration and how I really got involved. So my father has been involved with the labor movement for a very long time, also with the civil rights community. He's been involved with the NAACP. And my mother's a small business owner, so I have two different perspectives from my background to really lean support in terms of how I think about things. But really, early on in school, I actually struggled in school. So from about the 2nd to the 8th grade, I was in learning disability classes and was told I wasn't going to go to college and that I wouldn't be in any position like I am today. Luckily, because of the strong support system I have, my parents never let me accept that. So when I got to the point where I decided I was going to go to school in the 8th grade, I was going to go to college. I had those conversations with counselors and teachers who told me that I wasn't going to make it. But luckily, I went home and my mother said some words that still stick with me to this day. She said, "Rob, despite the fact that I did have learning disabilities, I have ADHD. Never to accept that as a limitation." He said, don't let yourself be defined by anybody's narrow expectations. You define yourself for yourself, by yourself. And I went on to obviously have success and go on and graduate in electrical engineering from the University of Cincinnati.
Which is no easy major there.
No, it's not. And then I went on to law school. And then, I've had other opportunities, but so my family is part of a lot of who I am, certainly.
So your father right now is the president of the local NAACP.
He is the president. He's the president, and my point is, he also taught me a lot about service. So, you couldn't just walk in the house unless you were engaged, knew what was going on within the city, within our country. You were registered to vote, and so all of that was a part of who I was. I was taken to civil rights demonstrations. I was taken to when there were strikes. I was there, and so I grew up with service to others as part of my DNA, and that definitely inspired my service and inspired me to want to become a lawyer, to understand how to change things so we can improve things for people. That's the reason why I really went to law school, and I went to engineering. My father was an engineer before. He had to actually drop out of engineering to help support the family. And although he wasn't able to finish, the Rhodes Hall, the building where I graduated from, I actually did get a chance to finish there. So, a lot of that story is what inspires me to be involved, and I realize to whom much is given, much is expected.
So you're an attorney.
I am.
Tell me a little bit about your practice.
Sure.
And given all the things that you've been involved with, we've mentioned UC, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. Lots of young attorneys have to spend those 80, 90-hour weeks.
Oh, absolutely.
And so tell me a little bit about your practice and how important that practice is and how important it is for you to build a practice.
Yeah, well, so I've had lots of opportunities, and so yes, early in my career, I certainly had to spend those hours, and I'm fortunate enough to have built up a good enough clientele. I represent a lot of working people. I represent individuals in actions of employment discrimination. I also represent some larger unions. I represent some of their funds and multinational securities litigation. So, it is very important to have a practice and build.
So, as a labor lawyer, you're on the labor side as opposed to a labor lawyer who is on the corporate side.
I'm on the labor and the employee side. I represent individuals day to day.
Okay.
And so I every day have gone up against the other side.
And that's a going practice.
It's a going practice, absolutely.
Okay.
It is.
You have just finished this long period on the UC Board of Trustees, ending up as president. And in that last year, you've had to oversee the search and selection of a new president.
Yes.
What have you learned from that experience that you think you can take with you if you were mayor of Cincinnati, a mid-sized city?
Well, I think there are a lot of things we can take, and it's not just the experience of actually choosing and helping to choose a new president. But starting there, you learn that it's always better to be collaborative in the process. It's always better to make sure you seek as much input as possible. When you look at how things are done in City Hall now, it's really about focusing on what's politically next instead of what's best for the city of Cincinnati. What we've done, we actually had about 17 listening sessions. We engaged in innovative ways to collect information. We used a local company called Wiser Here in order to collect information from our students, and so we made sure we had lots of responses and engagement from our students. We had a large group of folks come together to make sure that they had an opportunity to participate and we could hear their voice. Now, ultimately, the board makes the decision, but I really, really believe in listening, and my definition of listening is not just listening to what you say, but actually being willing to change my mind. And so that has taught me that you have to listen to as many voices as possible. It's also taught me that, it's very hard to actually come to a decision. The board went through a lot of different decisions. We went through a lot of data, but it shows that even when people have different points of view, when it's a tough decision, if you have leadership that cares about the goal, and we always didn't forget the goal is to do what's most important for our students, faculty, and staff, and look and make sure that we have leadership that reflects what's best for them and what fits the things that we want to see ourselves as an institution be. And one of the central things we focused on, particularly this year, is making sure that we can fulfill that we can be one of the most innovative and inclusive universities across the world. So our goal was to find a president that actually met that criteria, and we feel confident.
And diverse.
And diverse. And I think actually you have to have both, because often innovation happens in places and from people we actually don't usually expect. If you look at a lot of the innovators in the world, there are people that were marginalized initially, that were counted out. So not connecting people, making sure that if they don't have the opportunities, we're really missing out on a lot of potential people that could really help transform our region. I hear a lot of our partners always talk about the lack of the quality of, we don't have enough of the workforce that's trained here. And really the solution to that is, we have to figure out early on how to invest and expose our people in the city to these opportunities that normally don't get the opportunity. So it's why, because of my experience and because I understand the importance of innovation, we started a program called the UC Scholars Academy. That's also is going to inform how I would operate as the mayor of the city of Cincinnati. It's a program that's focused on providing access and opportunity to kids at CPS, particularly Hughes High School, where the valedictorian there some years back could not even get on the Clifton main campus. That showed a systemic failure on all of our behalf. So that experience at the University of Cincinnati has shown me that there are, if we look at it right, systemic solutions to help solve our problems. But we have to look at it like, even though I'm a lawyer, I consider myself an engineer first, because engineers solve problems. Sometimes lawyers just find them. So,
well, I think engineers are also known as people who understand organization and run things.
Exactly right.
That's lots of engineers don't end up doing engineering. They do end up management and whatever. Just to follow up a little bit, when the University of Cincinnati was a city university,
Yes.
As a historian, there's a tremendous connection between the university and the city government.
Absolutely.
What do you see, and you may have hinted at this, but what do you see in the long run as the proper relationship between the University of Cincinnati, which is now a state institution, and the city of Cincinnati?
Well, I think we're going to be intricately linked. Like, as we talk about, the University of Cincinnati has really grown astronomically. And so, but I think we, as the University of Cincinnati and as a city, we have to do more in order to make sure that people here have access to everything that happens at the University of Cincinnati and within our city and within our region. So what I see is a way that we connect city policy with business, with community leaders, and with the university. Where the UC is the only Research One institution. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an opportunity to look like, how can we have impact, social impact for people, and look for opportunities to become a more integrated and progressive city. If you look at cities that actually grow, they have an intricate relationship. So even though it's not a city university, I think we can look for opportunities for partnerships and how we can leverage resources. We can figure out how to recruit entrepreneurs here. I think we can do more, and I'll talk about this, I assume, more in the second half, but we can do more on really pushing a whole innovation agenda for the region. And I think we have all the assets here to make us one of the most competitive places, not only in Ohio, but really in the world.
One last question before we take a break, and that is, in a lot of places, you said that this election isn't about the streetcar, but in a lot of places that have used the streetcar
Yes.
effectively, what they've done is they've connected their central business district to their university areas.
Absolutely.
And in our city, in our region, CBD and the university are the two largest employment districts in the entire 15-county region. What do you see as the future of the streetcar?
Yes, and what I've said, and to clarify what that means, is we have a streetcar now. So we had the prior election, we were told that if we had the streetcar, it was going to lead to financial ruin, the world was going to end, there's no way we could do it. Now we're being told, well, everything is good, we're fiscally sound. So the fact is, we have a streetcar, and things are fiscally sound. So now the conversation is, how do we make sure that we have a successful streetcar, and larger than that, elevate the conversation. How do we make sure we have a transportation plan that can really make sure people are connected to jobs and helps us to be more competitive as a region, so people can get more access to jobs and we can become more competitive. Instead of majoring in minor arguments about, what's the budget between this year and next year with the streetcar, let's figure out what's a transportation plan that will make us competitive. I want to have that conversation, and City Council and those City Hall have not had that.
And sort of wants to have that conversation.
And I want to have it too.
So, and maybe by this November, so being on the ballots, it could be on at the same time. Stay right there. Stay tuned. After the break, I'll continue with the discussion with Rob Richardson Jr. Very good. Welcome back. I'm joined this morning by Rob Richardson Jr., who declared his candidacy for mayor of the city of Cincinnati earlier this week. In his announcement speech last Tuesday, Mr. Richardson struck one very clear message. Let's take a look.
We're here to make sure that we embrace innovation. But when we talk about innovation, we're not just talking about creating a large technology company, making money. We're really talking about having a spirit that's a rebellion against the status quo, to not accept things as they are.
Rob, innovation, and you've mentioned this in the first part of the show too.
Sure.
That's great language there.
Sure.
What might it mean concretely when you talk like that?
Sure. Well, what it means is where City Hall is going to be focused on actually trying to improve people's lives and making sure that the best ideas can rise to the top. And really making sure we have a culture that embraces innovation. So what do I mean by that? Specifically, we can do several things. One, when you talk about broadband access, if you really want to have a place that embraces innovation, When we talked about infrastructure earlier, yes, transportation is part of it. Digital infrastructure is also part of it. How do we make sure we expand broadband and give as much access to as many people as possible and make it as fast as possible? There are cities, I can't remember the city in Tennessee, that is not coming to mind right now, but they are leading actually the world in terms of broadband access, and they did it through a public-private partnership. The same type of focus we put towards development and developing our areas, we have to also put towards innovation. We also have to make sure that the innovation is inclusive. So we also have to look at how can we be innovative and looking at how we approach housing in a way that's inclusive. So as we continue to expand in areas like over the Rhine, and as we move out to future areas, how do we do so in a way that is inclusive of people that are working but maybe don't make $100,000 a year, making sure that we have inclusionary housing, so we're just not pushing working people who need quality housing out of the area. We have to be innovative and look for social impact too. So I look at innovation as really an opportunity for people to look at different ways to do things and really embrace that, and actually not be afraid to do that.
Just in one sense, we could talk about the streetcars innovation. We talked about that a little bit. Another thing that has been implemented here is the parking meter, the new parking meters with the app, which I live on. And how do you look at something like that? I mean, let me just ask it that way. How
the parking or the streetcar, which one?
No, the parking.
The parking. I mean, I think the parking is. I mean, it's having it as an app. I don't know how innovative that is. I mean, that's been replicated. I think it's something that I'm glad we caught up to finally doing. I think we need to look at, well, what is the future of transportation? How do we really look at having a regional transportation plan that can be innovative? And we don't have all the answers as the City Hall. The answers are not going to come from City Hall. They're going to come with working with community leaders, working with innovators, and working with businesses to really figure out how we can do this together. And I will always make sure that we have a social impact, because it can't just be about how much money we make, but also we have to make sure we're including people in the growth.
And something that has been an initiative of Mayor Cranley has been the Child Poverty Collaborative, which he, over the last 18 months, has gotten a lot of people. And one of their commitments was to have a lot of voices involved in that. What would be your critique, your evaluation of how well that's gone?
I think my critique and my evaluation is that these things always scratch the surface. Every time we've seen City Hall come up with how to really tackle poverty, there's nothing that really gets a dent, because they usually approach it in a way where we can have a task force, or it's very myopic in how they actually go after it. If you're really trying to go after poverty and you're really trying to do it, you have to really do it at a systemic level. And really, we have to have the same type of focus we do like we did with 3CDC and others, to make sure when we wanted to expand urban development, it has to be that type of intense focus that this is what we're going to do. I don't think it's been that type of focus. And so what has to happen is that we have to look at housing, we have to look at transportation, and we have to look at jobs, and then access to education and knowledge. Those things are required to really look at it. And let me say this, I don't love the term childhood poverty, because I think that really that's a cute term, but really that's saying children are in poverty because their parents are in poverty, right? So we have to look at—
It's not a question of how young, how old they have to get before we put them to work.
I think it's something that makes some people feel great about what they're doing, and there's some great strides that's being made, but this is the comparison I would make. Julian Bond said this often. There were two guys at a river, and there were babies being thrown in the river, and each one were picking up each baby at a time. Finally, one man ran away and said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I want to stop the person from throwing the babies in the river." This is an approach one baby at a time, which I get it, but if we're really trying to have an impact, we really need to look beyond that. How do we make sure our kids have access to the newest and latest technology? How are they exposed to innovation? How can they be in areas? How can families be in areas where the economic growth is happening and we make sure they're not being excluded? That has to be the conversation, not just starting a task force and then talking about things there.
Do you see centers of innovation already operating here that you would like to point to and maybe boost?
I do. So I can tell you at the University of Cincinnati, something we started during my last years, we created an innovation agenda, and we started the building 1819 and that building is where the old Sears building is going to be.
Oh, yeah.
And we
over on Reading Road
yes.
in Avondale.
We repurposed it, called it 1819 to signal our beginning when we started in 1819, as we move into our third century, which will focus on innovation and social impact. So I see us taking the efforts that are going on there, also working with Centrifuge and Cincy-Tech, but then also getting them to expand the focus on how can we make sure that other areas in the community are actually getting access to this technology. I also see us being able to look at getting more incubators to come in. We can look at getting Techstars to come here. I think Wendy Lee from Centrifuge just moved there. How can we get Techstars to come? There's an organization called Power Moves, which is a organization that looks to help minority businesses and get them into the tech business. We can have a Power Moves here. What we have to do is stop majoring in minor arguments. This is what we've been doing in City Hall for the last 6 or 7 years. And we really need to elevate the conversation, and I'm confident that I will be able to do that.
In terms of that quality of the discussion at City Hall, back at the very first soundbite that I used at the beginning of this show, I want to go back and quote something you said at the end. We are here to ensure that diversity of thought is embraced and not diminished at City Hall.
Yes.
Okay, there's something implied there.
Yeah.
What, and you sort of, this major minor argument thing, what do you think's going on at City Hall now?
Well, I think it's been a culture where folks have just been focused on trying to figure out how they can gain political edge over the next. And I think you have everyone in their positions looking for their next position. So there's never been a lot of substantive arguments. I'll give one example. If you look at what happened with the union raises, let's go there, and how it occurred. It occurred, I think, frankly, the person most responsible for a culture is the leader, and that is the current mayor. But I think everybody has some responsibility for what's going on. But if you look at what happened at City Hall with the raises, we gave raises, but we did so. I have support working men and women all my life. But we did so, and the mayor did so by circumventing the rules, I think undermining our very constitution of our city, which is the charter, and I think also possibly threatening really collective bargaining, because he went around an agreement that was already established with some of those who were already negotiating. I think it sets a dangerous precedent, and I don't think it should be done. But that was done, I think, simply in order to position for an election. Not with, there was no regard to any of that. It's how can we make sure we're more positioned? I think others do that, and he's not the only person that does that, but I think he's set the tone, and I think it's infected the whole culture. I think we need a whole new approach, and everyone that's there, both of my opponents have been there for a considerable amount of time. And so I just think we need to look at this differently and take a new, fresh approach. And I'll say this, politics didn't bring me to the community. The community brought me to politics. Everything I've done has been in service. The University of Cincinnati board is an unpaid position that I was glad to serve on. I also have done work in actually making sure we improve police-community relations and I founded the first NAACP college chapter of the NAACP and had a lot of experience during the unrest.
How do you think the university handled the shooting, the DuBose case, or is handling, because it's still going on?
It's still going on.
How would you evaluate what? There you were, chair of the board.
Right.
How do you think things have rolled out there?
I think we rolled out very well. When you look at when that happened, I said UC would not be defined by this moment, but we would certainly be transformed. And so we've actually implemented systemic reform across the board. We made it a board policy where we're going to have an independent monitor that's going to monitor the results to make sure we're implementing the changes that were suggested by the Exeter report. We've engaged our students, where our students have, I think they have seen that we're actually making changes. There was a group called the Irate 8 that we worked very closely with. And I think that if you talk to them, they would say we've made a lot of progress. We have a community council that we worked in tandem with. And as I said, as
you mean CUF? You mean off the campus?
Yeah, no, yes, that's part of a community council, because we've done that. We've worked with them. That's a part of how we do everything, and we get their advice before we make any major changes. So I think UC has come to recognize that as we have a police force, we have a greater responsibility to the community as well. And it's improved a lot. And so I think it's a slope, it's a continuous process. I think we have to keep doing it. I will also say this, we also have body cams. If we didn't have those body cameras, the prosecutor said he probably wouldn't have been able to bring out the case. So we did have those, at least that was a proactive measure, but we also made sure that we made lots of changes. A new police chief, a new reporting line. So we made a lot of systemic changes, but we're not where we want to be, but we think we're on the right path.
Okay. Stay right there. I want to say a few things before I say goodbye to you. But the race for Cincinnati mayor and councils is an off-year election, not aligning with the presidential, the congressional, or statewide elections. That means turnout is historically awful. For example, November 2012 presidential election drew over 138,600 Cincinnati residents to the polls. 6 months later, in the mayoral May 2013 primary, only 11,563 people turned out. That's 8% of the presidential turnout. Divide that over 3 or 4 candidates, it doesn't take many votes to win. In the general election in November, only 57,716 voters turned out. That means your vote really counts. And now you can register online, innovation, by the state. So go to the, myohiovote.com/voter registration and get yourself voted and turn out in May and November. Rob, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
And we'll have you back this year.
Look forward to
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, I'll be joined by Council Member Yvette Simpson.